True stories of demonic possession. That is what we're talking about today on the stream. I've got Adam Blai with me as a first-time guest. He wrote a book. It's only been published for about a month, and you can pick it up on Amazon. It's called The Exorcism Files, True Stories of Demonic Possession. Adam Blai, he's got a master's degree in psychology. He's a peritus of religious demonology and exorcism for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. He's an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists in Rome. He trains exorcists nationally, participates in deliverance ministry, and was a member of an investigative panel for paranormal research. He's also the author of Hauntings, Possessions, and Exorcisms, and the Catholic Guide to Miracles. Adam, it is a pleasure to invite you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Oh, sure, Cameron. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we were talking a little bit about the book before we went live, and you were saying that currently it's book 192 on Amazon of all the books. That seems pretty significant. That's really cool. So
Yeah,
congratulations on that.
yeah, thank you. I think it's just a spike in sales. So, probably tomorrow it'll be back at like 100,000 or whatever. So no big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but hopefully, I mean, the point of this show is in a lot of these shows, when we do like a book review or if we're talking about something that was recently published, we're not going to be able to go into all of the detail. So I want to encourage you to go check out the book. Obviously, listen to the interview, but you can go read the book for yourself. I actually today read this book in about an hour. That's how gripping it was. And I mentioned in the live chat that if you're listening to this, maybe you're listening at night or however you're watching this video or consuming this content, it might be a good idea to turn on some lights if you're a little bit squeamish or if you're a little bit scared of these sorts of things. I mean, the book, the way that you've structured it is it's kind of got a really big punch at the end, and we were talking about that a little bit in text as well. But Adam, why don't you just start and kind of fill in some details for the audience about a little bit more about who you are. As I say, this is your first time on the show. I read your bio that's on the back of the book here, but go ahead and fill out a little bit more of the details about who you are.
Well, the thing I enjoy most in regular life is tinkering on old cars. So I really enjoy wrenching on old muscle cars from the 60s and 70s. I'm in canon law school, so that's kind of church law, basically, kind of like the law within the Catholic Church. So that takes up a good bit of time. And yeah, so I work in our tribunal, doing some opinions on cases and things like that. And then this part of my life that this book is coming from is kind of the world of exorcism and deliverance ministry that I got pulled into about 15 years ago. And it's just been like a snowball rolling from there and getting more involved and intense over the years. It started in brainwave research and studying clinical psychology. And then when I realized there was something genuine going on, I kind of shifted gears and devoted my life to that.
How did you come to realize that something genuine was going on in your own words?
Well, I had been trained in diagnosing mental illness, and I had treated a good bit of reasonable range of mental illness in terms of in the community. And then I was also working in the Pennsylvania state prison system, where a lot of the severe mental illness ends up getting housed because the state hospital system collapsed in the 80s and 90s. So sadly, we put a lot of our mentally ill in prisons in the United States. So anyway, I had seen quite a bit, and possession doesn't look like any of that. And the thing that everybody, the armchair critic, would immediately say, "Oh, that's just epilepsy. You're dumb. You're misunderstanding it," or it's schizophrenia or something. Yeah, schizophrenia doesn't mean multiple personalities. People just have that misapprehension about the word. So technically, it would be dissociative identity disorder. But here's what I found is that schizophrenia doesn't make you suddenly fluent in ancient languages, right? Multiple personalities doesn't make you able to speak Greek. We had one case with Icelandic, but the grammar was from 600 years ago. Very obscure stuff. We had a woman here in Pennsylvania raised basically on a farm with a high school education, spoke only English, and she was interrogated in English, French, Latin, Lithuanian, German. during the exorcisms and responded to all the languages properly. So like that's the first of the signs of possession is facility in all languages.
Were
The
you there for for that one where she spoke all these different languages?
I wasn't there when all of them were interrogated, but I saw her interrogated in different languages at different times. And then I had friends that were there. Yeah, they were kind of spread out. There was
And
a number.
I assume that she was never familiar with any of those languages because there are some cases where someone may have studied Mandarin when they were younger, and then they went into a coma, and then they came out of the coma speaking fluent Mandarin. But that wasn't the case here, right? It's not as if she had like studied any of these languages and done any sort
Right. And even if you had studied one or two, it'd be very rare. You'd be quite a polyglot to be able to speak 5 or 6 languages. And then the more obscure ones, like the ancient languages, like it's pretty rare these days to speak Latin properly. You can get a basic functionality in Latin. It's very painful for me, but you can get a very basic knowledge of Latin, but it's hard to get really good at Latin. Greek is probably more difficult. So, like for instance, I know this will sound strange to you, but I got a text in Greek um, from a possessed person. So the demon took over. I know it sounds goofy, but demons aren't stupid. They know how to use phones. They know how to text people. And I had to find a priest friend who had a professor friend who knew Greek well enough to translate. And then, of course, you would say like, "Oh, well, that's just you did a Google Translate or something." But actually, the grammar was proper. And if you've ever studied ancient languages like Greek or Latin, Google Translate is awful, just awful at translating those. And it included foul language that isn't in the normal Greek dictionary that you would find, like colloquial dirty words, negative stuff. So anyway, the first thing is languages, and there's been myriad cases where they've been either asked questions in other languages or they've spoken them. And then knowledge of secret things. So like knowing your secret sins. Um, you see a lot of that in the movies, but you see some of it in exorcisms also, where the demon will, like, basically think of the most horrible thing you've done. Maybe you were completely alone and nobody knows about it, or the most embarrassing thing that you did that was bad, and then having that said in detail to the room. Like mental illness doesn't explain that. That's one example of knowing hidden things.
Mm.
The third thing is being able to detect the holy. So if I hold up a crucifix, obviously you're supposed to react if it's psychological and you're faking. Oh, I'm supposed to be scared of that. But you can line up 6 bottles of water, one of which was blessed in the other room out of the person's sight. They're all identical. They can always pick out the blessed one every time. They can tell you whether there's a relic in that box or not. I've had cases where they've been able to describe the saint whose relic it is without even seeing it. They can't see it, just getting close to it or touching it. And it goes on. The supernatural strength is the weakest of the signs. So that's the 4th classic sign. So the 4 is languages, knowing hidden things, detecting the holy, and then supernatural strength, or strength beyond your condition in life. That's the weakest of the signs, because in prison with psychotic, really violent guys, we've seen some crazy strength. The difference with possession is they never get tired. So 2 or 3 hours later, everybody's exhausted and wrung out, and your muscles are shaking, and the person comes back to the human state, and they don't feel any fatigue. They don't understand why everybody's wrecked. Anyway, those are the 4 signs. And once you see enough of this, and you get past the point of saying like, well, maybe it's the hyper rare thing with the coma, and maybe they heard it on TV and they got one sentence when they were 6 years old. Once you get past and realize like, no, they actually know the full language. And then the really obscure stuff like the Icelandic, but Icelandic from the grammar structure from 600 years ago. I had a friend on the internet in Iceland, because Icelandic is, if you know anything about it, it's fairly obscure, really complicated. Like the words are like 40 characters long, crazy language to try to learn. So I had a friend who was able to translate it for me. So anyway, you see that stuff enough, and you come to the point where and realize that you can't think your way out of it anymore.
Well, I wanted to mention, just as a kind of marker that we're going to do some Q&A a little bit later on. So as we're talking and just conversing about the book that I put on the screen earlier, as we're talking about this, if you have a question that pops up in your mind, or objection, or some sort of alternate explanation you want to offer, then please leave it in the live chat. I can't guarantee that I'm going to actually be able to scan everything now, so you may want to wait until we get to that point. If you do send it as a super chat, then I can definitely highlight that and make sure that that's going to be asked a little bit later on. Just wanted to let you know that we are going to do some Q&A in just a little bit. But so the way that your book is structured is that you kind of talk about some of the cases that were, they're what's the right scale to use here? Like from least scary to most scary? Would that be like the scale to use here? How did you structure the stories that you tell in this book?
Well, kind of moving from less severe to more severe. So moving from just communication and maybe domination through communication that you see with the occult and Ouija boards and divination, that kind of thing, and ghost hunting. Moving up through oppression, which can get really ugly. I think it's more disturbing in terms of the suffering the person's going through as opposed to being scary, but I could see how it would be scary. And then moving up into possession, and then possession with the higher ranked demons, the more dangerous guys, and then moving into the realm of real physical danger, meaning like there's crimes going on, attempts to lure you into a dangerous situation, or there's crimes going on, people being abducted. There's actual cults, not satanic panic, they're behind every rock kind of thing, but there are criminal groups that are in organizations that worship demons. It's not like they're hidden. There's wiki pages about some of them. And so, crossing over into occult crime, where you start getting into local, state, and federal law enforcement and that type of thing.
So what was the first encounter that you experienced personally where you're like, all right, this is for sure real?
Well, the first time I encountered a possessed person, I was more just not confused, but unsure about what I had just experienced. So I wouldn't say I was like, oh, that's definitely real. All I knew for sure was that didn't look like any of the mental illness I had seen. It didn't fit any diagnostic criteria that I encountered before. And the normal mechanisms you would do to like pull somebody out of that kind of distressed, altered state, like had zero effect. And the things talking out of the person, pretty clearly knew what was going on, mocked me for not knowing what was going on, and then proceeded to just do whatever they wanted. The first time I knew it was real probably was the first real solemn exorcism I was at. And it had been going on for a number of years, and it was the same woman that I mentioned with the English, French, Latin, Lithuanian, and German. It was a brutal case that had been going on for years before I got involved. I helped for maybe a year and a half or 2 years. And in that case, it was, I guess, the first moment I really knew something preternatural was happening. There's kind of two versions when a demon talks out of a person. One is like moving the breath like we're talking right now, like exactly the same. You're making noises with your mouth. All that's normal. And you can do it in a deep voice and you can do it in a high voice, like no big deal. And when demons animate a body and talk out of it, they basically sound like the person, though with different inflections and a different style of speaking. But basically it's the same vocal cords, so it's going to sound the same. There's another version of it that I've only seen once, and I saw it briefly in that case. And that was the person was on the floor during the exorcism, because that was the safest place for everybody. And at one point they had their mouth open and their head kind of back, and there was no movement of the lungs. There was no breath being pushed out. The mouth wasn't moving. It just hung open and stayed still. And this voice echoed from all parts of the room simultaneously, this really deep, loud, as if you had like surround sound speakers in all the corners of the room and a subwoofer. And it was just like, boom. And it made this kind of growl. It sounded like something like with the chest the size of a gorilla would make. Incredibly deep noise, not human. And every fiber in you, when you heard it, when I heard it, and then everybody else, I don't know if you've ever like maybe been at a zoo and heard an animal that made a sound that just activated that fear thing in you biologically, kind
Hmm.
of like that's a predator, like I'm in danger, like not human, that's dangerous. It was like that, but it was more alien. It was more like not of this earth. It's hard to describe. But I saw the person's mouth wasn't moving. They weren't blowing air out. It wasn't them making a deep sound, and it was coming from all sides of the room. It wasn't just coming from them.
And
And that
everybody
was,
heard it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It wasn't me imagining something. Like it was like the needle on the record got dragged across and everything stopped because it was like, whoa, like that was not, yeah, it was very strange. That was probably the moment where I knew something weird was going on. I knew it didn't match what I had seen in psychology. I saw that it responded to prayer. I saw some of the language stuff. But when that happened, I was like, well, that's alien. That's not at all. That's not something acting through a body. Like there's something else here that's the size of this room spiritually that just pulled the curtain aside just for a split second. And that was probably the moment that I realized truly, that was the first time I realized, like, okay, this is, yeah, like it's on.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like a part of my goal in tonight, and when I interviewed Father Vince Lampert as well, was like I want to try as best I can to play the role of like the skeptic or the devil's advocate here. And I mean, I'm having trouble like coming up with some alternate explanation other than just like you just made that story up. Like that's one of the only things that I can even come up with. Is like that story's not real. You just made it up. But when I read your accounts in the book and when I've talked to people like yourself and Father Vince Lampert, it doesn't strike me as like people making things up. It sounds like they're just reporting things that they experienced firsthand.
Yeah.
And
And I think being skeptical is a normal, rational, healthy first place to start. Like these are very extraordinary things that most people don't get to experience. So I think it's reasonable to wonder about it. I guess there's kind of there's two aspects of this that I think that even if you've not experienced it, most people can relate to, and that is number one, there's something in us at an intuitive level, kind of at a base level, that I think reacts to all this stuff and knows that it's real. And we know something is going on the good side and the bad. Like when we watch scary movies about this stuff, I think the reason we watch it and why it grips people so much, like the movie The Exorcist was just voted like the scariest movie ever made. I think the reason it grips us so much is because something in us knows that there's a reality to it. And that's why I think people are interested in movies and TV shows and books like this and talking to people like Father Lampert. I've known him for a long time. Um, Very good guy. And the other thing is, I think when you hear from people that do this work, we're just trying to share with everybody what we've learned so that other people don't get in the same trouble. It's you could think of it the equivalent of like drugs, right? Like if I was somebody who had worked as a drug and alcohol counselor and I said, here's meth and this is really terrible, and let me tell you some terrible stories about how it's destroyed some people so that you hopefully don't go do meth. And it's kind of the same thing as what I think we're all trying to do. Because unfortunately, there is a real spiritual evil. There is a real spiritual danger there. It's limited until we invite it, until we start playing with it. Um, and there's a great concern because again, going back to the drug analogy, if you've seen people wither and die from meth, you would take it very seriously in terms of trying to warn other people. And then some people will say like, well, it can't be that powerful of an addiction. I've never felt that. And so, I just don't believe you. And it's like, okay, fair enough. You don't have to. We could all figure it out for ourselves. But boy, hopefully this is not an area that you have to go stick your foot in the pool and find out for yourself. Please avoid it. Like, maybe just don't, because man, it's awful. Like the suffering people go through. It's not so much about the scary stories. The point is the human suffering, and it's avoidable.
Yeah. On that topic, in the book, you mentioned one of the accounts that was it. I think it may have been Satan himself who said, like, I'm gonna be done with this guy at, like, on Wednesday at 3 p.m. something like that. So one of the questions I've got is, like, and also in the book you talk about how Jesus is, like, in control of the whole situation, so he's the one who, like, makes sure that, like, this demon leaves or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I've got is, like, why doesn't Jesus just prevent this from happening in the first place? Or, like, why does he allow it to go on until, say, Wednesday at 3 p.m.? Like, why doesn't he just get rid of it altogether, like,
Mm-hmm.
earlier? Why does he
Right.
allow these things to go on so long? That just seems pretty perplexing to me. Is it because he? I mean, the natural the explanation that I come up with is that because, like, in these cases when we're dealing with possession, from what I've learned from Father Vince, is that you've got to invite this spirit, or this, you've got to invite it in somehow. It's not as if you're just, like, walking down the street one day and then you just, oh, now I've got a demon. Like, that's
Right.
not how it works from
Right.
learning from him. So maybe it's a case of, like, Jesus is respecting the free will of the person to, like, actively go and do that on their own,
Yep. For
free
sure.
will, their volition.
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
is that how you would view these things?
Yes, that's how they get in. The question, the mystery of evil, of why it's allowed by God. Number one, it's what you identified is free will. So he loves us and he wants to give us a chance to be kind to our neighbor, love God, and make our way back to God, right? He wants us to have that opportunity. In order to have that opportunity, he doesn't want blind robots that can't do anything else, like the plant that can only grow towards the sun, and that's all it knows, and that's all it can do. It can't choose anything else. He wants us to exercise our rational mind and choose him, and also reject the evil. And the evil is cruelty to neighbor, exploitation of others, harming others, getting ahead at other people's expense, that type of thing. And then, of course, worse evil, just destructive evil. So he wants us to grow and learn. Like, if you think of bad things you did when you were younger, like, we've all done bad things when we were younger. We've probably done bad things yesterday or last week, but worse when we were younger. Okay. The reason, most likely, that we're doing better now is because we've learned from our mistakes. We fell, we messed up, we felt bad, we reflected on it, and then we changed. And that's what evil does, is it provides an opportunity for temptation so that we can get a corrective experience and realize, oh, being a selfish jerk isn't the way to go. It doesn't feel very good. It doesn't lead to good things in my life. It doesn't lead to good things with family and friends. So I'm going to change and try to be a better person. That's what evil does, is it gives us that clarity. By having the shadow there, we can see the value of the light, essentially. I'm not saying it's a good, but God brings good out of it. So even in this extreme end with this demonic stuff that we're talking about, God is allowing it as a corrective, negative experience for the person that spiritually has walked up to the edge of the cliff and is teetering and is about to fall off. And at the last moment, he allows them to fully see the reality of what they've chosen before they fall off that cliff. And so hopefully they will then reject the evil and run back to God and say, oh, I didn't understand. Please forgive me. I want to be with you. I want to love others. I want to feel safe, all of that. And so the demon, in spite of itself, serves, because in the end, there's great spiritual conversion in people that are freed of this stuff. They have very fruitful spiritual lives from there on out, as a rule, and they're running after God for the rest of their lives in a good way, not in a fearful way, but in a joyful way, and they're grateful for being freed.
Well, let me put the book back up on the screen really quickly. So if you missed it earlier, the book that we're talking about tonight is called The Exorcism Files: True Stories of Demonic Possession. My guest is Adam Blai. And part of what I wanted to do tonight was to just have you recount some of these really, you know, awful stories, what they really are. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier too, is that like if you want to really read the accounts, then, or like to learn more about these accounts, then just buy the book. Like, go read the book, because I think there's, how many stories did you include in here? I mean, upwards of like 20 something. So it's definitely worth checking out and buying and reading. But what I wanted to ask you to do for us here, you already did recount one other story, but what was like the number one exorcism that you attended, or demon possession? What was the number one thing that really like sticks out in your mind as being very, I don't know, compelling, or something that people need to know about?
Hmm. Well, if you say what I think people need to know about, the most important thing is they need to know that God loves them and doesn't want them to be entangled with this stuff. And that freedom is always available. You can turn away from the demon, you can turn away from evil at any time, and you're never locked in. You're never unable to change your mind. There is no selling your soul. There is no point of no return. That would be the most important thing to convey. Scary stories from exorcisms, I mean, they're not as useful or edifying in the sense that you don't want to kind of build a spirituality around fearing the demon and looking
Mm.
at the antics of the demon, because then it becomes a kind of an idol unto itself. And you start building a kind of twisted spirituality of like, okay, I'm gonna be good because I'm afraid of the devil. Like, that's a twisted reason to be good. It's, you can start there. You can say, I don't want to go to hell. That's fair enough, but it's a very kind of beginner stage of spirituality. Eventually we get to the point where we realize, like, oh my gosh, like, here I am alive, existing. God brought me into existence, loves me enough, to keep me breathing in each moment, keep me existing, and keeps being merciful and not hitting me with a lightning bolt for all the jerky things that I've done. Like, at some point, hopefully, we start doing things because we want God to be happy with us and because we love God, as opposed to fearing the demon. So, I mean, that would be what I've learned that's most important in exorcisms, in the most crazy situations, is more that God is present and is limiting the demon and is doing all this and saving these people. Like, that's the important thing, not the gross displays. I've seen some crazy things. I've seen a person like gesture towards a screw that was in the wall across the room, kind of like something out of Star Wars, and it rips out of the wall, flies across the room into their hand, and they ram it into their arm and start gouging themselves. Like, I've seen crazy stuff, like stuff fly around, or different voices. The stuff with Satan was probably the most violent. That last case in the book was probably the craziest 11 days I've been through, because that was, 3 to 5 hours a day for 11 days straight. And the funny way that I reference it, if everybody's seen Star Wars, right? We've all seen Chewbacca and the reference to the Wookiee ripping your arm out. It kind of felt like that. It was not a big person at all, but the strength was just off the charts. Now, God limited what was going on, so I didn't have my arms ripped out, obviously, but boy, I was banged up. It was that was something else. And with that, it wasn't so much the preternatural displays, but it was the alternating between the physical beatings, the choking, um, just the brutality directed towards me. And that alternating between that and the scarier thing was the temptations. So it's not so much about oh, here's the big gross scene, but that he would grab you and lean in and whisper in your ear and start bargaining. Let me keep this person and I'll give you this. I know you want such and such. I can make that happen for you. Other things that sound, more like they were out of the New Testament. That was probably the more chilling part of it, is that, and not so much that, because whatever, like, what are the biggies, right? Money, women, power, fame, all that. He offered all that. Then who cares? Like, that's easy to reject because God's God and God owns the universe. Like, what do that's just silly. But I would say, Cameron, that the more chilling thing was when I was confident for myself, and everybody else that was there, I believe, was too, that it was actually Satan. Like the pronoun changed. It wasn't our kingdom anymore. It was my kingdom that he was talking about. And um, things that worked on other demons or impacted other demons seemed to, you know, he just was so pride filled. He didn't want to show any reaction to anything. But anyway, the most chilling thing about all that was that you're on his personal radar, I would say. And I'm glad in the sense of like, that's a gold star from the teacher. You know, if the devil hates your guts enough to show up personally to try to beat the snot out of you, that's like a gold star. Like that means you're doing something right. But at the same time, it's like, man, I'm in pretty deep if at the point where like it's a who's who of the Old Testament demons leading up to him, and then you get him for all these days.
So,
Um,
how did you know that you were dealing with Satan in the first place?
well, like I said, the first clue, and it was just a clue. I'm not saying it's evidence. Was the pronoun change? So there was a lot of references to our kingdom being affected by what was going on with these exorcisms and some stuff that was going on in the world that they would sometimes talk about, and that they really wanted to keep this person, and this person strategically was really valuable to them, probably because of some spiritual gifts that God had given that person, and that hell was trying to suppress and keep those gifts from operating in their life and affecting spiritually affecting things. Um, and then, like I said, though I'm sure he was affected, he showed no reaction to holy water, crosses, sacramentals, basically ignored the exorcism going on in the background, didn't react to things, didn't answer questions, just didn't seem to care, just would make a beeline, apparently for me. As soon as he would manifest the body, he would launch out of the chair and take me to the floor by the throat, and we'd roll around on the carpet the whole time, basically. And the strength was, unlike any strength I had felt before. I've rolled around on the carpet with a lot of possessed people over the years, and there is a lot of strength in them, but this was on a whole different ballpark. And though a lot of demons will say they're Satan in the beginning because they think it'll rattle people or scare them, you can tell, one, they're not serious. They're like random demon number 35, like bottom rank, and they're just saying they're Satan to be goofy and try to be scary because they're liars. But yeah, none of them have ever genuinely taken that position. So anyway, didn't react to things. Strength was off the charts, and yeah, and the pronoun changed. So that may not be enough for you, but after 15 years of doing this, and I've been at somewhere north of 1,000 exorcisms, this was qualitatively different. There was a lot of details about this particular exorcism that were different. And it's fine. People's first reaction is to armchair quarterback it and say like, "Oh, I don't agree. I don't think so." And it's like,
Yeah.
It's easy to say that not ever having done this once, let alone for a long time. But I understand. It's fine.
So I wanted to ask one more question, then we're going to turn over to the audience. And I was thinking about this as I was reading through your book and just thinking through my interview with Father Vince Lampert as well, and the whole topic. And I was thinking, this could serve as really good evidence for the truth of Christianity, seems to me. Like you could at least grant that it could be very good evidence for that. So the question that I wanted to pose to you, and this is kind of, the word escapes me, but it's going to be right up your wheelhouse because you've basically written a book on miracles as well. So what would you say, is there any kind of like relationship between miracles and demon possession in the sense of both of these provide evidence for the truth of Christianity? Would you see that as there being a relationship between the two? Obviously, the contexts are way different and things are way different, but what do you see as the relationship between the two?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing, Cameron, it's important to step back and realize that demonic possession and all this stuff that we're talking about, this is not something that only happens to Christians. There are Islamic exorcists that use two different methods to do exorcisms. There's Jewish exorcists in certain branches of Judaism. There are Buddhist exorcists. There's Native American exorcists. There are exorcists in India. This is a universal human problem. And if you take away the names of the spirits and you just say, what does it do? They all will tell you it's a deceptive spirit that lies and tricks its way into people's lives and then destroys them. Now, just because it's a universal human problem doesn't mean that like it's every religion is completely valid and it doesn't matter what you do, go to any exorcist of any type. What we've seen is basically with the really severe cases, generally around the world, people will bring those. I'm hearing myself. There you go. That's better. Can you still hear me, Cameron?
Sorry, I actually can't hear you. Something went wrong. I got an Amber Alert on my phone, and now I can't hear you. So I'm trying to reconnect here. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, can you say something? See if I can hear you now. Nope, still can't hear you. I've got something going on. Man, Amber Alert. Someone was abducted. So I hope nothing was wrong. Let me try to connect to a different audio source and see if that works. And if you can, because I can't hear you, maybe just say something else for the audience while I try to get this figured out.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, okay. So maybe the audience can hear. Yeah. So I guess my overarching point with this and with the book is that this is a cautionary tale. The main things that are in the book that I'm trying to talk about are black magic, essentially. And what that means is magic is essentially the quest for power over the world and other people. And it's my will be done versus thy will be done. So religion seeks to submit ourselves to God. Magic seeks to push our will onto other people and force the world to conform to what we want. And what we see consistently in scripture, and I think in a lot of religions around the world, but certainly in the Bible, is the idea that when we turn to created spirits, so God's the creator, angels, fallen angels, us, we're all created spirits. We have bodies too, of course. When we turn to created spirits for comfort, information, or power, we are basically violating the first commandment.
So Adam, I apologize about this, but it looked okay. It looks like the audio. So what was happening? And sorry, it looks like we've got everything fixed now. Is I can hear you now. I've got some new earbuds in, but the audience was hearing some echo when you were talking. But it seems like it's been fixed. So tell me real quickly what, because I missed the end of what you were saying earlier, and the relationship between miracles and. And demon possession, and I also missed where you went in the interim as well. So if you could just catch me up really quickly.
Yeah. So let's jump back to that because we hit the pause button on that because the audio cut out. So the relationship between miracles and this demonic stuff. The demon can only look at what God does and do a perverted version of that. They're not creative creatures. They don't make up new things to do. And so, like when we talk about levitation and exorcism, which is really rare, I haven't seen it yet, but I know a number of people that have seen it, that, exorcists I know well, and there's a few different versions of it. When we talk about levitation and exorcism, we also see levitation with some saints, and it happens usually during Mass or during prayer, they'll float up. Well, when we see levitation and exorcism, it's the devil doing a mockery of something that God does. The languages thing. Of course, holy angels also know all languages. They're using a faculty that they had with this infused knowledge that they had, and they're just applying it in a bad way. Making stuff fly around. Certainly, holy angels are capable of that, though they don't put on shows for people as a rule. But the fallen angels do a version of that. Healings, the devil can't heal. he cannot heal because he cannot create. What he can do is either mask the pain or take away a injury or a malady that he is making in the person. So imagine somebody pinching your arm and then letting go and saying, I healed you. You see the difference. So God does heal, but the devil does a mockery of healings. So there is actually a one-to-one relationship between the antics of the demons and the miracles, because they are fallen angels. They're limited in what they can do and what they can think about and how creative they are. So they just look at what God does and they try to make a perverted version of that. And so in a sense, they're two sides of kind of a, one side is a supernatural side of the coin, the other is preternatural. So supernatural is above nature, which is only God. Preternatural is basically beside nature. So it's not above nature, but it's not part of the normal day to day. I don't know if all that.
Yeah, it does. That was actually that was really good. So, what would you say to someone who's watching this? And I know that we're going to get responses from atheist YouTubers who are going to say these guys are crazy. What would you say to someone like that? What would you have to offer to someone who just thinks that you're just talking crazy stuff tonight?
That's fine. I mean, if you okay, so it's not about like arguing to try to convince people that this topic's real. If you want to look at some reasons why you might want to consider that it could be real, first off, I would look at the span of human history, that this has been a universal human complaint and problem in all the world religions down through history. If you then want to say, okay, well, it's just been misunderstood psychiatric problems or medical problems, then you have to look a little more closely. I guess first off, you have to wonder why it's still around. So why do people in the exorcism community get phone calls from doctors and psychiatrists with cases that they say, like, and I've had these conversations, doctors like, I've been doing this 25 years, 30 years, whatever, a lot of experience. I've got this case. This isn't normal. This isn't psychiatry. I think this person needs prayer. Why is the modern medical world, I'm not saying all doctors endorse these ideas, but why are there still cases out there that don't, they defy explanation and they defy treatment? And then the signs of possession, like, really, like, brain lesion doesn't make you suddenly fluent in ancient languages, knowing details about people's lives. And it's not about, oh, I snooped on the internet and looked at their social media and then I can tell them something bad they did from that photo at a party from college. I mean, very specific things that are not out there. Again, like the most embarrassing thing that nobody knows about and you were alone when it happened and there is no evidence of it, that kind of thing. But I guess, I would say, okay, it's fine if you think it doesn't exist, because that's a rational position. If you've never experienced anything spiritual, it's reasonable to say, I don't think it exists because I've not bumped into it. Then I would just say, at least please avoid the dark side of the spiritual world. Please avoid the witchcraft. Please avoid divination, playing around with demonic magic, goetic magic, that kind of stuff. Like, that's not the end of the pool to go looking for your spiritual experience in, is what I would say. So if you're an atheist and you have a natural curiosity about the afterlife, for instance, a parent dies and suddenly you're interested, or you have that moment where you realize you're not going to be around forever, and that question comes into your mind, and you go looking for the spiritual, as most humans do, just please don't go to the dark end of the pool when you do it. Try looking for God. Try looking for the good in the religious communities that try to care for others and show love and support in community versus becoming subservient to these things. So I would say, like, I get it. Just please listen to us enough that when you go looking for the spiritual, you avoid these things.
Okay, let's do let's turn now to the audience and get some questions from the audience. So I've got a few queued up here. We have had a few super chats sent in, a couple super chats. Sorry about that. So formatting is off. Let me fix this really quickly. That way everyone can read. All right. So the question is, does mental illness lead to the spiritual? I have a psychotic mental illness, and one time years ago I was in bed and heard a scary snarling noise.
Well, I'm not sure what they mean by lead to the spiritual. There are lots of people with, and of course, psychotic means, a break with reality, or basically you're experiencing things that aren't objectively real. So if you and I were in a room and I said, "Oh, I see a monkey on the coffee table," and you're like, "There's no monkey on the coffee table. It doesn't exist." And to me, it's there. That's a psychotic experience. So it's an experience of something that isn't there in the objective reality. There's lots of mental illness that can produce scary experiences like that, particularly, the reference to in bed, right? Whenever you hear that, you want to start thinking about sleep paralysis. You want to start thinking about hypnagogic hallucinations. So when we're kind of waking up and the body is half dreaming and half awake, it's really easy to hear something that seems to be objectively real. And if there's sleep paralysis, it's really common to have a scary experience with that. So you can be hallucinating and paralyzed and have a really scary experience, and it can be purely a brainstem issue with the mechanisms when we go to sleep. So basically, I would say it doesn't lead to the spiritual in the sense of because you're mentally ill, you're going to have angelic or demonic experiences. It's easy to misinterpret mental illness as spiritual because you're trying to make sense of your experience. You're trying to contextualize it and put some labels on things and make sense of it so that you can be more at peace with what you're going through. Of course, the most important thing if there's psychosis going on is to take your medication and work with the doctors and tell them what's happening. But hopefully this was the only scary experience they had this one time years ago.
All right, we've had another super chat come in from Demand. He says, underrated resources for finding testimony of demons. I think that's his question. And then 2, please keep doing more of this, Cam. It's powerful data, and the more the better. And then 3, ask local pastors/priests too. Adam, I would actually like to get with you, and if you've got some other resources or other people you think I should interview on this topic, I would love to know. But what are your underrated resources for finding testimony of demons?
I don't know what that means.
Maybe books like yours, other resources like Father Lampert's.
Oh, okay. Cameron, yeah, I'm trying to think. Father Gabriel Amorth, if he said underrated, I guess he means like maybe books that aren't the common books everybody grabs. Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot out there, Cameron, because most people that deal with this were really leery about putting it out there. And like the book I just wrote, I held back all the really horrible stuff. Like, honestly, no publisher is going to publish it if it had the full grossness of what goes on. And so there's very little out there.
Well, now I want to know what you're talking about.
Actually, you don't. The things that have happened to some people, you don't. Like, people say they want to hear the worst stuff that you've seen somebody go through or somebody's experience, but you actually don't, because it wounds your imagination just to hear it. And then, yeah, believe me, like I've had closer friends that have asked that question, and I'll start explaining something and they'll stop me and say, no, don't finish. Like, it's that bad. But anyway, so I'm rambling, but basically what I'm saying is there's not a ton out there because most people doing this aren't trying to give testimony about demons to people. Like, we're really skittish about doing so because there has to be a really good reason to do it. So I'm thinking Father Gabriel Amorth is probably the most experienced exorcist. He's passed on now, but he did this for 40 or 50 years, and he was the main exorcist in Rome. So he saw thousands upon thousands of cases. So if you read his books carefully, you can get a lot out of it. Yeah. And I think that's it. I think the other 2 are for you.
Yeah, no, I think that I definitely want to do more of this type of content. So it's not going to be the last time that we cover this topic. Yeah, I did want to mention. I saw at some point during the stream someone commented and said, "Why does Cameron look so angry?" This is my resting thinking face. So when I'm thinking about what someone else is saying, or like this is my that's my focusing face. So sorry if it looks like I'm angry, but that's definitely not what's going on my end. I'm just thinking through everything. Okay, here's a super chat from Jacob Henderson. Looks like he's an atheist YouTuber. He says, "Atheist YouTuber here. Thanks, Cameron, for all the content. Is there any way to approach the spiritual with the scientific method? I think it helps."
Now, the spiritual in general, maybe, but not this stuff. It would be kind of the equivalent of saying, I don't know, studying sexual assault by trying to control somebody being sexually assaulted and recording it in different ways. Like, it's basically a horrible thing to think about. You're talking about people being like attacked and horrifically damaged and traumatized. That's not the kind of thing that you would then say, okay, now wait, now we're going to change this variable, and now we're going to have you be traumatized again, and we're going to look at whether the independent variables affecting the dependent. So in that sense, no, it's more like, think of it more like this is a spiritual emergency room where you're trying to sew somebody up and keep them from dying. So it doesn't really lend itself to the scientific method. Now, on the miracle side of things, I think there's more room for that. Not that you can get God to do miracles on command, which is what it would take to do an experiment. But there's, I think, more data and more things that don't involve human distress that one could look at. For instance, if you look at the miracles of healings that are used to basically validate sainthood, there's some very striking and interesting cases of healings where outside medical doctors, really good professionals in whatever area that the healing happened in medically, kind of rigorously documented this and worked on it. So I would say the healings are one place you could go, but unfortunately, both God and the demonic doesn't do things on command. So the strict scientific method, I don't think really works.
All right, we had a question come in from Joey Puvel. Sorry, I'm butchering this, I'm sure. What about our children, babies? As a Catholic, do you have any recommendations for protecting the little ones?
Yeah, sure. Educate them is the biggest thing. So kids growing up now, we've normalized black magic and the occult in our culture. You know, ghost hunting is one version of basically necromancy. So we're now celebrating and normalizing things that are spiritually dangerous. So as a Christian or a Catholic Christian, I would catechize your kids and educate them on the good and bad spiritual and what God's rules are to stay safe. That would be the most helpful thing.
All right, we got a question from John Cusack. Why don't we have video recordings of some of these? Do the demons know that they're being recorded?
There's no video recordings because you're not allowed to videotape exorcisms. You're not allowed to audio record them. You're kind of thinking more, and you can see a chinchilla in the background running around. You're kind of thinking more in a casual sense. So if you imagine, like, if a relative of yours was possessed and going through exorcisms, would you want somebody recording that and then putting video clips out? If it were to become,
didn't you say that you want to protect like the identity of the folks that
Sure.
are involved in these, and you've changed the names and maybe even some of the genders of people?
Oh yeah, sure. Because your life would be ruined if the media got a hold of the fact that you had gone through exorcisms. Like, there'd be reporters on your front lawn every morning. You'd have to move. That case in, I think it was Illinois, where the kid walked up the wall backwards in front of the staff at the hospital a few years ago, that family had to move because they were harassed so much. The guy who was the basis of the movie The Exorcist, he spent his life in fear of being discovered who he was and was constantly trying to avoid being found out. So, like, these people are asking for help. You don't then record it for your own, I don't know, benefit. and you wouldn't
Hmm.
want to, contribute to destroying somebody's life that way.
Well, then why is it okay to tell the stories if you can't record them? I mean, couldn't you just like blur out their face or something? Couldn't you do something like that to where you can still protect their anonymity? Is that how you say that?
Well, first off, the rules, there are fixed rules for exorcisms, and one of them is no media recordings allowed, period. So just right there, that's the law of the church. You can't do it. I can tell you that if you tried to do it, um, yes, the demons would know full well exactly what you're doing, and they would know you're doing something against the rules of the church. And so basically, you'd be putting yourself and that person in a very bad position where you're now introducing a selfish goal into the act of trying to pray for this person. Like you're going to try to exploit this situation for something else.
For views on YouTube or
Yeah, like that would be just really horrible. Now, the point in telling the stories in a limited way that I have is to try to warn people about what not to mess with so they don't get in trouble. And 5 years from now, they're not in trouble, or 10 years from now, they're not in trouble. And that's why I said I think we're all skittish about telling these stories because you don't want to just tell the horrible story, but you want to share something useful.
all right, let's move on to a question from sort of a follow up from Old Things Pass Away, All Things Become New. I've also audibly heard in bed, The Lord is here.
Is that
Do you have
the
any?
same person that wrote earlier?
Yes, the same. I think the very first question that we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, again, impossible for me to know, especially like this remotely. And even if I was talking with the person, I wouldn't try to diagnose them over the phone.
Hmm.
But yeah, you could certainly have a hallucination of hearing a voice like that. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what they're asking, but I can tell you that religious delusions within psychosis are really, really common. So it's very common for people to make sense of their psychotic experiences, their hallucinations, in a religious way, because just at a basic level, it kind of makes sense. I'm hearing a voice and I don't see a person here, so it must be a spirit. And if I have a religious upbringing, I'll put it in that context and say, well, it's got to be an angel or the devil or it's got to be God. So I think, you know, I think there's a good chance that that's just mental illness.
Okay, so a couple more questions I've got queued up, but I wanted to check with you first because I told you that we'd go for about an hour,
Oh, that's fine.
and we're
That's
at
fine.
the. Are you okay with? Okay. So here's a question from Nahoa Life, and very very inquisitive young man. I've even met him personally. He's very very bright. He's going to be a new upcoming thinker on the scene. So his question is, what are some of the most compelling possession slash exorcism cases with a significant amount of information about them? Medical docs, eyewitness testimony, firsthand reports, etc.
Well, again, once we once we determine somebody's actually possessed and an exorcism is approved, there's no there's no like pursuing data after that. It's kind of like we're take a medical analogy. We're going to do a blood test and see if you have this type of cancer. Okay, we found it. You have this type of cancer. You're done investigating. You're now going to go into chemo and radiation or have surgery or all of the above. And the focus is going to be purely on curing the cancer, right? So it's not like this is done in a semi-lab mindset where it's like, well, we need to gather more data about the rest of it. The beginning, you try to rule out medical and psychiatric with an outside evaluation and say, can that explain this? And that's done by an outside medical doctor or psychiatrist, sometimes a psychologist. They're looking at it from their perspective. Then we do the spiritual diagnosis, which is those 4 signs of possession we talked about earlier. If we see that there's actual evidence of possession, you then move on to prayer, but there's no more investigation or recording of things. The closest thing to what he's talking about would be the reports that we get from a doctor, like a literal medical like report on the person that's in their file that's HIPAA. That's somebody's medical documents. Like nobody's going to show those to you because the federal law protects your medical documentation, right? So if that was shared with us by the patient, by the person, that is in a confidential file in a locked file cabinet. Legally, you don't share that with anybody, nor would you. It's really inappropriate to do that, right? Eyewitness testimony, like all the people in the room see this stuff, but they're not going out talking about it unless there's a very good reason to do so. So you're not going to like find them on YouTube saying I was at an exorcism. The people, the witnesses at exorcisms tend to be older, very prayerful members of the parish and community, often women that are always there and present to just be witnesses. But they're not there to like, I don't know, go tell their story or share anything. You know, they agree to
They
confidentiality
don't have
before.
ulterior motives.
No, no, these are older prayerful people that agree to confidentiality, again to protect the dignity of the people being prayed for. So
Mhm.
so this idea of like this is open to scrutiny, it really isn't, and the church has never been in a position of like trying to convince the world that this is real or answering to the world about it. Like the
I
church
suppose
doesn't
that
have.
is another.
Hmm?
Sorry, sorry to cut you off, but I was going to say maybe that's one difference between like a demon possessed case and a miracle. Is that often in cases of miracles, it's like very open to sharing the documentation, knowing who the person was who was healed.
Accept the medical documentation unless the person has shared it. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. This stuff it's never been something that like it's again the church isn't like answering to the world about this. Like we're trying to help people that are suffering in these horrible ways um, after an outside medical evaluation, and when we're sure it's possession, then we're just trying to help them. We're not doing this to prove anything to the world.
Hmm. Okay, we did have a super chat that was sent in about Protestantism. So, do Protestants also perform exorcisms? Is it only the Roman Catholic Church?
So technically, they don't, and here's why. The actual book of exorcisms, which I don't have a copy right here, I think it's at the office. There's one that was written in 1614, and then one more recent one. The only revision of it was 1998, and then some revisions. So um, that book that the church put together in 1614 initially, um, it was put together by the Catholic Church, and no other denominations have um, a Roman ritual with an exorcism in it. So, kind of by definition, nobody else does them in that sense. So, and we need to know what is when you say exorcism, what do you really mean? You mean what we call as a solemn exorcism, meaning like this is a formal action of the church. And within that exorcism, what makes it an exorcistic prayer is that it has commands in it. Okay, so deliverance is essentially Jesus, please help this person. That's a request to God, and then God does it or he doesn't. We don't control that. That's deprecatory prayer. That's deliverance. That's a request to God. We're supposed to pray for each other. We're all supposed to pray for each other. Exorcism is, in the name of Jesus, get out. So it's between the person praying and the demon directly. It's not asking God to do it. And so there's a direct challenge. And the church has separated that direct challenge with the demon into this other context because the church realized early on in the early centuries that this is a really dangerous ministry that can end up being harmful and can really damage the people that are doing it. And so the Protestant denominations often will take a sola scriptura approach, which is essentially citing the Bible, citing baptismal promises, and sometimes they'll use a command depending on the person because they don't have a fixed prayer. So it's kind of whatever the person wants to do in terms of their prayer. But they don't have a formal exorcism rite. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think it does. And yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on to a question from Matt Peach, and then we'll got one more question, then we'll close it out. Would a possessed person present themselves for Holy Eucharist, or would they avoid it?
Yeah, so almost always a possessed person either will get so uncomfortable when Mass is starting that they'll leave, or at the consecration. So that's when the priest is consecrating the bread and the wine into the body and blood of Jesus. As that's about to happen, if there's a possessed person there at that point, they will be compelled to flee the church, almost always, because Jesus is about to enter the room in a special way. They can't tolerate that. They flee. And if they don't flee, they'll often have racking pains in their body, and they'll end up leaving because they'll be doubled over in pain. Very rarely, I've seen a few cases over the years where a person, because God wanted it, received the grace to be able to stay and even receive communion sometimes. But vast majority of the time, they would not be able to receive communion. They can try to go to confession, but their mind will generally go blank and they won't remember what they walked in trying to go there to confess. And with the mass, basically, I've known people that they'll sit in the vestibule outside of the main room of the church, kind of in the entryway, and they'll sit there just to hear the mass, but they can't tolerate getting any closer.
Yeah, I thought that was actually a good question to ask because it does kind of come up in the book as well. Every now and then you'll mention how someone is experiencing that and they weren't able to enter the church at all, or sometimes even you do like a holy mass at home. I've never even heard of that, but it's a thing. But you do mass at home, and like people even like were reacting to that as well.
Sure.
Okay, let's move on to one last question, then we'll close out the stream for today from MNM. Question: are demons involved in porn production or use?
Yeah, that's well, I mean, in the sense that they're involved in temptation and they would influence people to encourage all of that, sure, they're involved, but they're involved in tempting us all the time. They're tempting us right now. That doesn't mean that they're possessing us or controlling us. Now, that being said, I have heard through people looking for help or consultation that there is quite a bit of Satanism and black magic in the porn industry in terms of the people making it. I don't know to what extent that's going on. I'm sure a lot of that industry is more just about organized crime and regular business. But I know there's at least some of it because I've had people call me for consultation from California that had seen stuff. I mean, yeah. So I would say, yes, they're involved. Certainly porn debases and dehumanizes people into objects, and it's one of our greatest weaknesses. And so is sexuality is one of our greatest weaknesses. So of course the devil is going to exploit that weakness as much as he can. I'm not saying the people making porn are possessed, but I'm saying that I'm confident that some of the people in that industry are involved in black magic and Satanism.
So do you have time for one more? There was a good question that came in
Sure.
just now that I read, and it does have to do with one of the stories in the book as well. I don't remember what chapter it was in, but Jonathan Smith says, are non-Catholic exorcisms effective? We talked about that briefly, but feel free to expound. And then the second question he's got is, in what role does the Blessed Mother play in exorcisms?
Right. So if somebody were to attempt a solemn exorcism, if they were to pick up the Roman Ritual, that Catholic book that has the exorcism in it, and they're not a priest with permission from their bishop, like I'm a lay person, if we didn't make that clear, I'm a lay person, I'm not a priest, I can't do exorcisms. I just, for some reason, I've been pulled into this position, and I've been at so many of them, and I have a knack for teaching, but I don't actually do the exorcisms. If somebody were to pick that book up that isn't a priest with permission from their bishop and attempt it on a real possessed person, what we have seen, because if somebody tries to even address the demon or ask a question or give a command that's there that isn't the designated exorcist, the demon will immediately say, you don't have authority over me, I don't have to listen to you, and will proceed to demonstrate that fact by not doing what they say and usually attacking them because of the challenge. So if somebody were to attempt that, basically the demon would probably mock them and make fun of them and they'd end up rolling around on the carpet and it wouldn't be effective. It would just get them riled up, and then they would probably mock the person for presuming more authority than they have or from breaking the rules. So in that sense, a non-Catholic exorcism of picking that book up, it wouldn't work. You'd just get probably wounded in some way, honestly, by the end of it. The Blessed Mother Mary plays a huge role in exorcisms. Probably 9 times out of 10 or more the frequently than that. And there's another chinchilla sighting. I got to wrangle them once we're done. They're not supposed to be out. Mary plays a huge role in exorcisms. More than 9 times out of 10, Mary is the figure that the person sees when the final demon is cast out. So more than 9 times out of 10, even if the person's not Catholic, even not Christian, not baptized. We had a woman down in Oklahoma who, everybody's heard the name Mary. Everybody knows the reference to Mary, the mother of Jesus. But this woman had no idea. She said, this beautiful woman came in the room. She looked at me and said, it's over. Who was that? She had no clue who she had encountered. And we've had other people say, I didn't realize who it was until she was already departing. And they see her physically. We don't see her, but they see her spiritually. But to them, she's solid and real. And she always says the same thing. It's over. And that's the moment that they're finally freed. Now, from a Catholic perspective, that makes sense to us in the sense that Mary was the first person that reflected love back to Jesus when he was born. She was the first person he saw that held him, that showed love to him. And she was probably the last person he saw from the cross as he was dying. And she raised him. She showered him with love most of his life. She was incredibly close to him. And we believe that she's a mediatrix of the graces that he gives to the world. And you can see this in Revelation. I don't want to argue like a Protestant Catholic argument, but the reference to Mary is the figure in Revelations that steps on the neck of the devil, of the dragon in Revelations. That's a reference to she's the one that defeats the devil. Well, she doesn't defeat the devil herself, but by saying yes and bringing Christ into the world, he defeats the devil, but it was her yes that was required. And so she plays a big role in salvation history. So it makes sense to us that we see her so involved in exorcisms. And by the way, this is a fun thing to end on, Cameron. And I'm not picking on our Protestant friends at all, but this is a consistency that I've seen. When you'll mention Jesus in an exorcism, like in an offhand way, like you're taking a break, the demon's still there, but you'll reference, the priest will say something like, well, you're going to go when Jesus says you're going to go. You'll get an attitude like, yeah, we know he's God. Of course, we're going to go when he says. We know he's God, dummy. You'll get kind of that flippant attitude from them. Just about every time when a demon's being ornery and difficult that day, or the case isn't progressing well, and we'll say something like, well, maybe we should ask Mary to come and help us today. Maybe we should pause and pray a rosary. Maybe we should ask for Mary's help. The first thing the demon says almost always is anything but her. Don't call that woman. She so defeats them because her virtue is obedience and humility, and the demon's vices are pride and disobedience. Like that's the demon's MO, is pride and disobedience. And Mary represented the yes to God and the humility. And so they're just terrified of Mary because her virtues completely oppose them and defeat them. They know Jesus is God. She's not God. She doesn't decide when it's over. He does. But he seems to send his mother almost 9 times out of 10.
Well, one last time, the Exorcism Files tonight. My guest has been Adam Blai. And I want you guys to pick this up if you're interested. True Stories of Demonic Possession. I've got it linked in the description of the video for your convenience. Adam, this has been very interesting. I mean, the book, as I said, I read through it in about an hour. That's the fastest I've ever read a book. And I just couldn't put it down. It was that gripping.
I'm glad. I mean, I hope it was.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, it's good to emphasize again, like the purpose of this, the purpose of the book and the purpose of tonight is really I guess there are a few different things that it could serve the purposes, but I mean, you stated in the book and in your conclusion, like you want to make sure that people stay away from this kind of stuff. Like that's the point here, is that people get involved and they invite these spirits in, and then they get possessed, and that's leads to all this terrible suffering. And one way to avoid that is to avoid those practices and avoid that altogether. And so I think it's important. Yeah, I mean, but I appreciate you coming on tonight, Adam. This has been very enlightening. So thank you.
I appreciate the talk, Cameron. Good job.
Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with before we close out?
No, just God bless everybody that's listening now, and God bless anybody that watches this in the future. And it's never too late. You can always come back to God. There's always forgiveness. Whatever's going on, just reach out for him.
Amen. Okay, well, let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comments as usual, and I will see you in the next Capturing Christianity video. So see you guys later. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?